Okay, we got to talk about the Pelicans because boy, oh boy, it's looking really bad in New Orleans. Now, a couple of days ago, I was watching the Pelicans versus Spurs, where the Spurs were able to still pull off the victory despite the fact that Victor Wembanyama fouled out in OT. In this game, I really didn't like the defensive effort from New Orleans, but I really overlooked it because the Spurs are just one of the better teams in the NBA to start the season, so I gave it a bit of a pass. However, what ended up happening in the next two games was really hard to overlook. The Pelicans would then follow that loss with another one against the Boston Celtics, where Boston was able to score over 120 points in regulation, but the worst loss came after that, where the Pelicans lost against the Denver Nuggets, allowing again over 120 points in regulation, while the Pelicans were struggling mightily to cross over the 60-point threshold after 3 quarters. Poole, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, all bricking, no defensive effort, and even when Jokic was off the floor, bro, Denver got anything they wanted. So because of these outcomes, it really piqued my interest. I did a little bit more digging, watched some interviews, went back to watch some games, and also tuned in to the matchup against the Clippers, where once more they took a L, this time to the hand of a game winner from Kawhi Leonard, which now has left this Pelicans team with an 0-5 start to the season. But trust me when I say the record really doesn't do any justice to how bad all of this really is for the Pelicans. First, let's talk about these 5 games. Not only are the Pelicans 0-5 to start this year, but also they are bottom 3 on both sides of the floor. Offensively and defensively, there's not really much redeemable about this roster to start the year off, especially because there are several players on this team that just cannot make a shot whatsoever. 6 players are shooting below 40% from the field. 3-point shooters, or at least we use that in air quotes, 3-point shooters are struggling mightily, and even Zion, to start the year off, someone who is a bit one-dimensional in terms of his offensive game, can't finish around the basket at the same level that he did in previous years. And then on the other side of the ball, defensively, I'm gonna be honest with you, I just don't know what exactly the Pelicans think that they're doing any given night. Yes, there is a bit of a personnel problem because having players like Jordan Poole, DeAndre Jordan, because he now is on this roster as well, Derek Queen, even Zion to an extent as well on the defensive side of the floor, there's certainly going to be some deficits. However, it's more so the energy and effort that is given defensively that is really concerning. That matchup against the Denver Nuggets was really eye-opening because there were several incidences where the Nuggets were really just walking into easy looks over and over and over again. Bad rotations, really sloppy closeouts, and quite frankly, sometimes just leaving players open early on this season. And all of that is really concerning. Now, to be fair to New Orleans and their fan base, a lot of these things are certainly fixable. You can look at what's happening in terms of offensively and assume that players are going to get better. They're not going to continue to shoot this bad. I mean, 6 players shooting sub 40% from the field certainly isn't going to continue. Trey Murphy started off this season not being able to knock down his 3-point shot. And even though I'm not the biggest believer in Herb Jones being a quote-unquote 3-point shooter, I certainly believe he will improve in that aspect as well. So no, I don't want to make a video overreacting to a 5-game sample size of just bad shooting luck potentially. However, what I do want to acknowledge is that starting out 0-5 for this team is practically unacceptable because of how this team has built this roster this offseason, as well as what exactly they are supposed to be expecting in the near future. Why exactly do I say that? First off, and I did not know this, but the Pelicans decided to fire David Griffin during the offseason, replace him with Joe Dumars, and Joe Dumars, the first thing he did was immediately start trading away draft capital that really did not make any sense to do so whatsoever. So the 2 draft picks that he decided to trade during this offseason were both first-round unprotected picks, one of which was their own in 2026, and the other one was the Indiana Pacers 2026 first overall pick. Now, how exactly did he get the Pacers pick? Just quickly, Pascal Siakam gets traded from Toronto to Indiana. Indiana ships off their 2026 first-round unprotected pick to Toronto. The Pelicans decided to ship off Brandon Ingram last year to Toronto, and in return, Toronto says, hey, we'll give you all the 2026 first-round pick from Indiana. So that's how they received it. Joe Dumars says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to trade this 2026 unprotected first-round pick from Indiana back to Indiana in the middle of the finals. This is like game 5. He just does this. Indiana says, we'll take this and we'll give you this year's first round pick of our own, which was the 23rd overall pick. 2 games later, as we all know, Halliburton tears his Achilles, and here we are now in the middle of the 25-26 season, and the Pacers, very similar to the Pelicans, are winless. So off the rip, you trading that back to Indiana is crazy because now that pick is extremely valuable. But it doesn't stop there. Now with the Pacers' first overall pick in this year's draft class, which is a 23rd overall selection, instead of just drafting a player, Joe Dumars says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move up to the 13th overall pick, swap with Atlanta, and not only will I do that, but I will also give Atlanta the Pelicans 2026 unprotected first round pick for this year's 13th overall selection. So effectively moving up from the 23rd overall pick to the 13th overall pick while also giving next year's unprotected first round pick in the process. Now you would assume that moving all these pieces around for this one player has to be valuable because effectively you have now turned Ingram, who is the most valuable piece from that AD trade, to a draft pick. Turn that draft pick into 2 draft picks just to then move up in a 2025 draft class. So who is this player that you have decided to select? Derek Queen. Now, this is no shade to Derek Queen. I hope that he has a very impactful and amazing NBA career. I just know it won't be with the Pelicans because effectively, for those who are unaware, Derek Queen receives comps that is close to Zach Randolph or Alfred Sengun, basically a low post big body big who has some passing game to his ability, but certainly doesn't have the capability of anchoring a professional defense. That type of player may be, somewhat effective in today's NBA, who knows, but definitely doesn't seem like it's going to be the greatest of fits next to a front court that will feature Herb Jones and Zion Williamson. That makes absolutely no sense at all. And now it's even worse because you've done all of this finagling for a player that is not going to be that great of a fit on your roster just for the draft capital that you've moved to put you in this situation, more than likely going to result in not just 1, but 2 top 5 selections in next year's draft class if everything continues down this path with both the Pacers and the Pelicans. The second thing that's also really crazy that's happening right now is that, again, this roster just doesn't have an identity. You did all of this maneuvering, you did all of this changing, and on a game-to-game basis, I really don't think that the Pelicans know who they are. In the 5 games that they have played, they already have 5 different starting lineups. 5. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that Zion has already missed the game due to a foot injury, which is really concerning. And also Yves Missi has missed the game as well. So some of that does have to do with availability, but there's also games like the one that just happened against the Clippers where everyone who can be available is available to play, and Willie Green still decides to go out with a completely different lineup. Matter of fact, there's so many lineups being ran right now that in the 4 games in which Zion has played, Willie Green has already ran out 22 different lineups featuring Zion in 4 games. That is ridiculous. And some of these lineups don't even really make sense. Most of them feature 2, maybe even 3 other non-floor spacers around Zion. Also, some of them feature old man DeAndre Jordan, who I don't understand why, but they gave him a fully guaranteed contract for the rest of the season. And despite previous efforts of trying Zion in experimental roles, either at the 5 spot or as a ball handler, there's not enough lineups in that vein. Somehow we've gotten to a point where the Pelicans know who Zion is as a player. They know his strengths and weaknesses and still are not building lineups around those strengths and weaknesses. Playing Zion next to another 5 that cannot shoot, or playing Zion in front courts with 2 other players that are non-floor spacers just don't make any sense whatsoever. And there's several moments in games where it's really, really hard to watch when effectively there are 2 players defending Zion and no one is defending old man Jordan. It just does not make any sense having DeAndre Jordan on the floor next to Zion at all. So all of that doesn't make any sense either. But what may be even more illuminating when I was doing my research are 2 things that I don't necessarily know if there is a change outside of significant adjustments with the head coach, general manager, or potentially just making a decision to just ship off Zion and blowing everything up. For starters, Willie Green and Joe Dumars, do you all not understand what's going on with his roster? Do they not understand where we are right now in the Zion era? Do you not comprehend comprehend that you just gave Herb Jones a contract extension? Do you not understand that Trey Murphy is on his roster long term? Do you not understand that you just traded CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole in hopes to address the point guard play until DeJounte Murray gets back? Do you not understand that Zion is now in year 6 or 7 and has not played a single minute of playoff basketball? Because when you hear them talk about this team, you would have thought that this was a rebuilding team, a young team, a team that just needs some moral victories underneath their belt. Because every single interview that I hear from both Willie Green, but especially from Joe Dumars, it comes across as if like this is a roster that they're rebuilding with.
I said, there's no amount of wins. There's no, you got to make the play in, you got to make the play. None of that. I said, what I expect from us is to be like a high competing team every night. And I said, guys, let me tell you specifically why I say that. If you have a really deep team, if you have 10, 11 guys that you can go to, and they all play hard every night because we're so deep, I said, the wins will take care of themselves. I don't know what that'll be, but if we play as hard as we can play every night, we're going to get enough wins where we're going to be happy. So I'm not going to put a number on you because I don't know what that is, but I expect our team to play hard every night. I expect no less.
Really? Really? Joe Dumars, that's what you really feel? That's how you really feel? That's interesting, because I could have sworn that you made commitments to these players to compete for a bare minimum, a playoff spot. I assume that you made the decision with this roster, especially trading CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole, so you can thrust right into playoff contention. I would have thought that you were someone, as a new general manager replacing David Griffin over the offseason, that you were committed to this idea of putting the Pelicans in position to make sure that Zion gets some type of playoff experience. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about moral victories. You're talking about just playing hard. You're talking about bench depth. Really? That's crazy. Willie Green talking about, oh man, even though we lost against the Clippers, we're really trying hard. This time you really saw us and you gave us all that effort. Really? You're out there playing Jeremiah Fears, a rookie, over Jordan Poole. Why? Is this a roster that you're trying to give rookies more playing time? Like, is that what you're really doing? That's very, very interesting. Also, it's very questionable when you say these things, knowing that the schedule that's coming up is hellacious. I don't know who made the schedule for the Pelicans, but hey, they certainly don't like New Orleans, because after this game against the Clippers, they didn't have to play the Thunder. That's more than likely going to be a loss. Then you have the Hornets and Mavericks, should be wins in theory, especially because Dallas is not going to be with AD. So there's that. Then after that, though, it's the Spurs, then the Suns, hopefully a win. But then after that, it's the Portland Trailblazers, Lakers, Warriors, Thunder, Nuggets, Mavericks, and then AD should be back at that point in time. Hawks, Bulls, Grizzlies, Warriors, Lakers, Wolves, Nets, hopefully an easy win, Spurs, Rockets, Pacers, Mavericks, Cavs. And that's right around Christmas. If my math serves me correctly, and I do believe I'm being fairly generous to New Orleans with this prediction, there is a real likelihood that the Pelicans could go into Christmas with already 15 losses to their name. In this Western Conference is crazy. And this is a huge reason why, with this egregiously bad start, there's already rumors that Willie Green is going to be fired. Now, to be fair to Willie Green, I would like to give him some grace, because I don't believe he was given the adequate pieces to push his team into playoff conversations. But also, as I say that, this is the same gentleman that has already given us 5 starting lineups in 5 different games, and also has put 22 different lineups around Zion. So there's that. At the end of the day, bro, there's only so many games that you can lose in the Western Conference. You picking up 5 in the first 5 is already crazy, but there's a real likelihood that you could end up with 15 losses in the first 30 games just to make you 500. And again, that's me being very, very generous, because more than likely, it's probably going to be more closer than 20 games in that loss column than it is 15. But then the other thing that I'm also taking away when I'm watching the Pelicans is that Zion really has not progressed in the ways in which you would like him to as a basketball player. And I honestly believe that some of this is a symptom of him just missing all of these games, never really picking up any type of rhythm with some of his teammates. And now we're seeing someone who is 25 years old, who effectively has a same game that he had when he was entering the league. Now, I don't believe that Zion is going to continue to struggle at the rim and like he has in the first 5 games. And to be fair to Zion, he matched up against some really good defensive bigs, Triple J, Big Zoo, and of course Wemby. So a lot of that will tank his accuracy at the basket. And it's been so bad early on that I fail to believe it's going to continue down this path. But even with Zion being in the best shape of his career, it's still very clear that there are evident and undeniable limitations to his game. And in some ways, that's really not that big of a deal if he can overcome those limitations off of his sheer size and athleticism. But in the other capacity, it's also worth noting that because of who he is as a player, there is a specific roster that you must build around him. And that roster normally is going to have to consist of a 5-man that can give you some type of defensive intangibles, or at least be serviceable at bare minimum on that side of the ball, while also being a quality 3-point shooter as well to give proper floor spacing to Zion. Because even with him being in better shape, and even with him having a little bit more reps in the NBA, the type of defender that we thought he was going to be entering in this league just isn't there. His motor just doesn't run that high as many people expected. And then in terms of point guard play, again, due to his limitations as a creator, especially outside of the basket, Zion is going to need to play next to someone who is a consistent shot creator. And I don't know what DeJounte Murray is going to look like after coming off of what could be a career-altering injury. And Jordan Poole, even though I don't think he's as bad as he has been to start the season, because he's been really bad as well, I also don't believe that Jordan Poole is that good of an offensive weapon, in particular a shot creator and decision maker, to help out an offense led by Zion. Overall, who these players have been to start the first 5 games of this season, I don't believe that's who they are, and I don't believe that's who they're going to continue to be. I do look at this team in a much bigger scope, and I quickly realize how we got here and how far removed they are from where they're supposed to be based off of where they were 5-7 years ago when everything started off. And that's very concerning in a bigger picture, because effectively, if this is a roster that cannot find themselves building an adequate team around Zion, or heck, even just building a quality team in general in a very competitive Western Conference, it does beg the question, why did you trade for Jordan Poole? Why did you give Herb Jones and Trey Murphy the contract extension? Why did you trade all this draft capital over the last 12 months? And more importantly, is Zion being untouchable or off the market really the smartest move if you don't have the ability to build the proper team around him? Because at this point, you're really running out of runway to continue to try to build this Zion-led team. And taking into consideration everything that has transpired leading up to this year, this definitely feels like a playoff or bust season. And to start this year off, we're certainly going down the latter half. But hey, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.